Hello and welcome to China Now. My name is Makiza Latifa. We begin with China Currents, where we bring you the latest stories capturing attention across China. In entertainment and technology, four Chinese humanoid robotics companies each invested around 14 million US dollars to appear on this year's Lunar New Year Gala, showcasing the growing presence of robotics in popular culture. In a lighter but surprising turn, a Harry Potter villain has unexpectedly become a Lunar New Year mascot in China, capturing the imagination of audiences nationwide. And in social commentary, a viral online questioning has sparked intense debate. Would you be willing to give up 40% of your income for 1 year to fund a war over Taiwan? These stories and more are coming up on China Currents. Stay tuned.
Welcome to China Currents. In today's episode, four Chinese humanoid robotics companies allegedly spent around 14 million US dollars each for the opportunity to appear on China's Lunar New Year Gala. A Harry Potter antagonist unexpectedly becomes a Lunar New Year mascot in China. A question went viral on Chinese social media. Would you be willing to give up 40% of your income for a year to fund a war over Taiwan? Bad Bunny's album becomes the first Latin American album to reach #1 on Apple Music in China. Chinese-American skier representing China at the Milan Winter Olympics finds herself thrust into the court of public opinion in both China and the US. Now, let's begin. As the Lunar New Year approaches, several Chinese humanoid robotics companies are reportedly making an unexpected marketing bet, spending heavily for an appearance on China's Spring Festival Gala, which many young people consider to be out of fashion. The iconic gala airs on Lunar New Year's Eve and is watched by an estimated 800 million viewers worldwide, making it one of the most watched television events on Earth. For technology firms, the appeal lies not only in the audience size but also in the symbolic validation, a signal that the industry aligns with national priorities. Last year, robotics company Unitree became a household name after its robots performed a traditional folk dance on the show. The exposure was followed by a surge in investor interest. In 2025 alone, the company completed multiple funding rounds and has reportedly begun preparing for a public listing. This year, four firms were reported to be sharing the slot, and the total appearance cost said to be 56 million US dollars. The confirmed participants include Unitree, Magic Lab, Galbot, and Noetics. Though the cost is extravagant, companies tend to see the gala as a worthy investment. Industry insiders say that the exposure will encourage more orders. The resulting sales figures will then support new fundraising rounds, and the capital will feed back into R&D. Beyond individual firms, the industry as a whole benefits from such visibility. After Unitree's appearance last year, China's recorded over 200 funding deals in embodied AI startups in 2025, raising a combined 52 billion US dollars, a sharp increase from the previous year. While Chinese tech executives are busy, the Lunar New Year has also unexpectedly elevated a British actor into Chinese households. Ahead of the holiday, images of Tom Felton, taken when he was 12 years old playing Draco Malfoy in Harry Potter, have been widely shared in China as door decorations meant to bring good fortune. The idea draws on a traditional custom of posting the Chinese character Fu, fortune, on doors during the new year. In Mandarin, Malfoy sounds similar to Ma Fu, a phrase associated with luck in the year of the horse. Similar wordplay has appeared before. In previous Lunar New Years, images of Sherlock Holmes, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, have also been used in festive decorations, as the Chinese name of the character includes the character for fortune. On China's e-commerce platforms, Malfoy-themed New Year's items, fridge magnets, phone cases, prints, have sold briskly, with some shops reporting hundreds of orders in just 2 days. Next, a viral Chinese online debate. On Zhihu, China's largest Q&A platform, one user asked, If unification with Taiwan required you to contribute 40% of your monthly income to military spending for 1 year, would you agree? Within 72 hours, the question received more than 1,200 responses. Among highly upvoted answers, the dominant response was no. Some argue that simply contributing money from ordinary citizens does not determine the outcome of a war. Historical examples show that factors such as public support, strategic planning, troop morale, and effective use of limited resources often play a far more decisive role. For instance, during the Chinese Civil War, the Communist Party prevailed over the nationalists largely due to popular backing and disciplined organization, rather than financial superiority. Another group rejected the premise altogether, arguing that a military campaign to reunify Taiwan would be more akin to a fratricidal conflict than an external war of conquest. They noted that such an operation would entail enormous long-term economic and social costs, even if successful. The most common responses, however, were semi-humorous calculations. One user estimated that asking every citizen to contribute 40% of their annual income would raise roughly $3 trillion. By comparison, China's official annual defense budget is just over $140 billion, covering weapons development, logistics, and routine training. The sheer scale of this hypothetical contribution prompted jokes that such spending would only make sense if defending against an alien invasion. Next, Bad Bunny tops the charts in China, making it the first Latin American album to ever hit #1 on Apple Music in China. People all over the world are falling in love with Bad Bunny and his music, especially after his Grammy win as well as his performance at the Super Bowl. His performance was moving and powerful and a celebration of America as a continent, as he named Central, South American, and Caribbean countries, and not just the United States. While he received a mix of support and backlash from some Americans in the United States, people around the world, including China, are paying attention to his message and music. A now internet-famous singer and teacher at an elder residence center in Chengdu, Master Wen Hao, is going viral for singing Bad Bunny's hit song Debí Tirar Más Fotos to his class of elders, who are singing and dancing with him in the background. Despite language barriers, Bad Bunny's music is reaching people in China, as people are moved by his music and passionate messages. Now to an athlete navigating cross-border scrutiny, Eileen Gu. At the Milan Winter Olympics, the US-born freestyle skier is once again competing for China, having already won a silver medal in women's slopestyle. In American media, Gu has explained her decision simply. The US team already had strong representation. On platforms like Reddit, some users have mocked the explanation as opportunistic. In China, state media continues to frame Gu as a symbol of national pride. Yet some netizens remain skeptical, pointing to her commercial success and US connections. In 2024, she ranked second globally among female athletes in total earnings, driven largely by endorsements. 3 years ago, things were very different. At the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, Gu competed for China in 3 events and won 2 golds and 1 silver. Her outgoing personality and stylish skiing won her many fans, and her mother's education approach inspired many Chinese parents. In recent years, as tensions between China and the US have grown, her public appearances with US officials like Vice President Harris have attracted attention. Nevertheless, many Chinese netizens still appreciate her contributions, even if money is a factor. Gu is still worthy of recognition for achieving China's first Olympic medals in snow sports events. That's all for today. Happy Chinese New Year.
And now we turn to the Thinkers Forum, where we explore experts' perspectives on China and global affairs. In this edition, so we are joined by Shaun Rein, a political commentator and China expert who provides his analysis on current economic, social, and political trends in China, drawing on years of research and experience. Shaun Rein examines how domestic development intersect with China's position on the world stage, offering insights that go beyond the headlines and help us understand the broader implications of today's events. Stay with us.
Trump's attacks on Denmark and the rest of NATO by saying that he wants to control Greenland essentially means that it's the end of NATO, because his actions truly don't make a lot of sense from a geopolitical standpoint. On the one hand, for almost 70 years, the United States has had free access to Greenland's rare earth and other commodity deposits. And 2 months ago, Greenland wasn't even part of President Trump's national security new white paper that was laying out spheres of influence and how the United States was seeing the global security concern. So by attacking Greenland, which doesn't make any sense, Trump is threatening the NATO alliance. You've already seen the French, the British are all sending troops to Greenland in military exercises. Now, they say this is just a show of exercise and not a threat against the United States, but the message is clear. America's NATO allies are not going to continue to put up with Trump. This is a major shift, I think, in how you look at world powers. Now, what Trump has been doing the last couple months, whether it be with Venezuela, whether it be with Greenland, whether it be with Iran, a lot of people say that this is a shift about spheres of influence, that Trump has lost the trade war with China and is sort of licking his wounds. And instead of saying we can't push back against China directly in Asia, we need to push back against China by focusing on the Western Hemisphere, the Middle East, and Greenland. And people are saying this is part of a 4D chess program. You know, squeeze out Maduro in Venezuela, control oil because about 4% of China's oil comes from Venezuela. Try to topple Khomeini in Iran, also squeeze out China because 20 to 30% of China's oil comes from Iran. But frankly, I don't think this is some big 4D chess game or a part of a grand strategy that Trump is putting in place. I think that gives him too much credit right now. I don't think we can be looking at traditional geopolitical analysis, whether it be the John Mearsheimer school of thought, a Waltzian thought, or something coming from neoliberal or neocons. I think right now what we're dealing with when it comes to Trump, and I'm not a psychologist, but I think we have narcissistic personality disorder. He likes to shock and awe everybody around them, to be at the center of attention, and bully as much as he can other people, other countries, because he gets a personal satisfaction out of this. It's all about power. At the end of the day, I think he likes the idea of invading Greenland or taking it over to build a monument to himself. He might want to rename it, instead of Greenland, Trumpland, just like he's renaming the Monroe Doctrine, the Doe Doctrine in Venezuela after he took Maduro. This is a man who I think is deeply sick and has changed his behavior in the last 4 to 6 months, gone from, tendencies and funniness to something that's quite mentally ill. So I don't think we can take normal geopolitical frameworks on how Trump is looking at Greenland and other nations. So unfortunately for the Americans, I think this is the end of NATO as we know it. However, there is a caveat. You have individual countries in Europe, Keir Starmer in the UK, Macron in France, Merz in Germany, are standing up to Trump. But what you're not seeing is the major alliances, the EU under Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas, or NATO itself under Mark Rutte, the General Secretary. They are not criticizing Trump strongly. So I think you're also going to see not just a break within NATO, but you're also seeing a break of the European sense of identity and cohesive network under the EU. And so we're entering a very dangerous period because the alliances and the world order that has largely kept the Western world, not all in the world, but the Western world fairly peaceful since the end of World War II is breaking down. And it's all starting because of Trump. And again, I think it's his inability to control himself. As a narcissist, he is lashing out at other world leaders, at other countries, because he can't help himself. It's a very dangerous time. I agree with Ray Dalio that we're at a very dangerous cycle where debt, political implosion, and potentially war is on the horizon. Because of Trump's moves in Greenland, he is rewriting alliances. So let me first take a look at what's happening with Canada, because Canada is squeezed between Greenland and the United States. Now, Canada's largest trade partner is the US. They do about $600 billion of trade with America every year. Their second largest trade partner is China. And so Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, came to China last week to meet with Xi Jinping. Now, this was the first visit by a Canadian Prime Minister to China since 2017. So there's been basically a decade of coldness that emerged after Canada, working with the first Trump administration, essentially kidnapped Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei, and the daughter of the founding chairman, Ren Zhengfei. Now, what Carney has done is he has looked to see the world not as they want it, but how it is. That is what he has essentially said. And so he's visited China, and he's gotten rid of the 100% tariffs on Chinese NEVs. He's lowered it down to only about 6% for the first 49,000 cars or so. And today he announced that he hopes that Chinese automakers are actually going to build giant factories in Canada, which will help create jobs for Canadians and also give access to cheap but good quality Chinese NEVs for the everyday Canadian consumer. This will lower inflation there, which has been a nagging issue in Canada over the last 6-7 years. So Carney is taking a very pragmatic view of how to deal with this changing threat, changing relations with the United States. He is gravitating towards China. When it comes to the Europeans, I think the Europeans are less pragmatic than Carney. So they feel that they're under assault over Greenland, so they don't know what to do. Part of them wants to go the way things used to be. You've seen Kaja Kallas, who runs foreign affairs for the EU. She has said Trump's actions are making Russia and China happy, but she's not condemning Trump. So I think one of the issues is that the relationship between Europe and China might get less frosty, but it's not going to become as warm as I think Canada and China's relations are going to be. At the end of the day, the Europeans still have a lot of fear-mongering and a lot of hate towards China in a way that I don't think even the Canadians have. Some people argue that Trump is trying to take Greenland, or he's trying to replace Maduro in Venezuela because he's trying to lick his wounds from losing the trade war with China. And let's be very clear. China so far has won the trade war against the United States. And it's really because China has de-risked from America since 2017, 2018, when Trump first launched the trade war. At the time, 17% of Chinese exports went to the United States. That number is down to only 12%, and overall exports to the United States only accounts for about 2.5% of China's economy. So China has de-risked from the US, and they've built up strong trade alliances in Southeast Asia, which now accounts for almost 18% of China's exports, as well as the Middle East and Africa. When you look at it, China in 2025 had a $1.2 trillion excess in trade with other nations. So the trading from China remains robust. GDP, the numbers just came out, did indeed grow at the Chinese government target rate of 5%. So because of China's economic strength, because they controlled rare earth refining, because they control platinum and silver and the refining of so many other industries, they have the upper hand in the trade war with the United States. Now, some people say this is why Trump has twisted back towards Venezuela or Iran, because this is his way of showing power, flexing muscles to the rest of the world and to China to say that America is still powerful. Frankly, I don't buy that argument, okay? I also don't buy the argument that he took out Venezuela's President Maduro because of narco-terrorism or narco-trafficking. If it was about drugs, why is it that Trump just pardoned the former president of Honduras, who was found guilty of drug trafficking into the United States? If it was about fraud, why would Trump have just pardoned the former governor of Puerto Rico? So it's not about narco-terrorism. It's not about trade. It's about power. It's about showing the world that Trump personally is still a powerful person. Again, I don't think this is geopolitical, long-term grand strategic thinking. And some people have said that he took out Maduro because Maduro was dancing and embarrassing Trump. And Maduro had said, "Come and get me." I truly believe that we are dealing with someone who believes he's not just a king, not just a god, but he believes he's above God. And he's unable, he's thin-skinned, he's unable to handle anyone not treating him with the sycophancy that he's expecting. And so when Maduro dances, he gets mad. When Macron or Merz or Starmer aren't sycophants to him, he gets mad, which is why he just slapped 10% more tariffs on them for dealing with Greenland. So, you can talk a lot about geopolitics and frameworks, but I think at the end of the day, we're dealing with the whims of an individual who just wants to exert power, use shock and awe to gain as much power and arguably money for himself. When you look with Venezuela, he took the oil, he's selling it, and instead of putting it into bank accounts for the US, which would be kleptocracy in the first place, he's moving the bank's $500 million worth to Qatar, to accounts that he personally controls. So the question is, where is all this money going? Where are the checks and balances? Where is Pam Bondi and the State Department, who are providing that rule of law and ensure that even the President of the United States follows it? But we don't have that right now because Bondi, just like the rest of the cabinet members right now, are sycophants. And so it's a very dangerous system because we are having a country where the president is dismantling the institutions that make up America as a great country. The checks and balances, the State Department, all of these different cabinets are now being brought to just be sycophantic to him. And if not, he lashes out. And it's a very scary time because I think geopolitics is not being driven by long-term thinking processes, but literally the whims of a madman. One of the other areas that I think is quite concerning is what's happened with the Jeffrey Epstein files. When you look at it, Pam Bondi was supposed to release unredacted files to Congress over a month ago, and she hasn't done it yet. If you look at it in October and November of this year, there was a crescendo of anger, even from MAGA. Trump's most loyal voters were furious at the president for not releasing the Epstein files. And at the height of this anger, where some of the most famous podcasters and people on Twitter who supported Trump said, "I don't support him anymore because of what's happening with Epstein, because his behavior isn't normal. If he didn't have anything to hide, why would he say that it's a hoax? Why would he not just release the files?" As soon as the criticism from his voters reached a high crescendo, Trump went after Venezuela, Trump went after Greenland, Trump went after Iran. And so there is a feeling among many that these geopolitical kerfuffles, this tension, has actually been triggered by Trump as a way to divert away tension from the Epstein files. And over the last couple weeks, it's worked. You don't hear people in MAGA talking about Epstein anymore. They're now talking about why we have to control Greenland. They're now talking about why fentanyl deaths are going down, which they started going down a couple years ago because Trump kidnapped Maduro. So there's a lot of propaganda, wag the dog theory, and moves that are taking place in the United States right now, I think, as an attempt to divert away from the Epstein files, because it's just shocking to me how many political leaders used to hobnob with Epstein on a regular basis. And it doesn't make sense what Trump's doing unless he's involved. But I don't think he is, but I think he's protecting someone else very close to him who is involved.
And that's all for the Thinkers Forum. Up next, we turn to top picks, where we highlight sharp analysis on today's most pressing global issues. Our featured commentator for this edition is Peter Yang, a geopolitics and foreign policy analyst who examines what he calls the boomer gerontocracy and explores how neoliberal policies have disproportionately impacted Generation Z, often known as Gen Z, shaping economic and social dynamics across the globe.
Despite being prized for working 20 hours a day, Donald Trump is 79 years old. He is the oldest president ever elected in the American history. Trump isn't an outlier. He is the latest instance of a general trend. Since 1993, 4 of the last 5 US presidents were born in the 1940s. The same tendency shows up across Europe and other developed countries. Elections just keep recruiting leaders from the baby boomers, which is a generation born between the 1940s and the 1960s. For all intents and purposes, the concept of gerontocracy, which literally means the society ruled by old people, it was once mocked as a Soviet disease, but now coming back to haunt the West. So why this generation and why for so long? Let's start with what the boomers inherited. The baby boomers may be the most fortunate generation in modern history. Born after World War II, they missed the worst shocks of the early 20th century, then arrived just in time to benefit from post-war reconstruction. War has destroyed lives. It also shattered the old structures. The entrenched barriers and vested interests were weakened. Aristocratic families, industrial oligarchs, the whole networks of inherited privilege has crumbled. Even centuries-old cities with vast amount of accumulated power were rebuilt from the ground up. Think about Berlin, London, and Tokyo. A famous American political scientist called Mancur Orson has described the post-war global economy as a clean slate. In his terms, the organized interests that lived off rents instead of productivity had been neutralized by the rupture of war. What followed was almost 30 years of inclusive economic growth. The OECD economies, which is literally the advanced economies, has expanded rapidly, around 5% a year. And inequality fell, which was reflected in a steady decline in the Gini coefficient. Social mobility became real in that world. The post-war capitalism has rewarded talents, and Cold War competitions has reinforced the arrangements. The Soviet bloc has insisted that socialism was democratic because it has distributed the means of production equally. It attacked capitalism as a system of hierarchy and endless exploitations. So Western societies under that ideological pressure had to demonstrate something in practice. Not equality of outcome, but at least the equality of opportunities. So that pressure has reshaped the institutions. The state subsidies has made professional education, including even law schools, accessible to the working class people. And the post-war economy, alongside an expanding government bureaucracy, has offered the stable careers at scale. That is how you get people's biographies that now look almost impossible. Like Joe Biden, whose family went bankrupt when he was young, could still attend the Syracuse University Law School. Which is a mediocre institution at best, yet he still became the youngest senator in US history. Bill Clinton, raising a middle-class family, could reach Oxford and Yale Law School, then became the youngest governor and the third youngest president in the US history. But the emphasis on opportunity didn't just remain a Cold War rhetoric. It also provided the ideological foundation for neoliberalism. In his book called The Road to Serfdom, the Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek has argued that markets with minimal government intervention could deliver both efficiency and equality, because by his standard, that competition under open information would be fair. Milton Friedman further hardened this claim, saying that a society that puts equality before freedom will end up with neither equality nor freedom. Once that worldview took hold, it didn't just change policy. It has rewrote the moral grammar of the entire Western society. Achievements and efficiencies became not just norms to celebrate, but rationale to justify extraordinary compensation for individuals. And the ideology flatters the people who already have an edge. The performance-based rewards sounds neutral, but it is the most persuasive to those already sitting in the structurally advantaged positions, those who are best placed to capture the upside and then create the outcome by merit. By the 1980s, boomers had just risen into the leadership across both public and private sectors. Under the new regime, they have won again. After the Cold War ended, the neoliberal capitalism looked vindicated. Financialization accelerated. The management performance was tied to shareholder values. The older models of management, which was built around experience, institutional knowledge, and employee welfare, has given way to professional management, which prizes the outsider thinking, short-term value generation, and later turns to be outright extraction. A large share of boomers became the backbone of this professional management class, rotating through firms and leadership posts in short stints. Boomers have fundamentally entrenched dominance over the entire economy. The assets they have accumulated in the last century has soured after the bailouts of the 2008 financial crisis, and then again during the COVID-19 pandemic. By year 2025, boomers had roughly 51% of total wealth, while the Generation X, the Gen X, held around 26%. The Gen Z, on the other hand, born in 1990s and 2000s, had barely 10%. This imbalance is not self-correcting. Returns on the existing assets show no sign of declining. Even the natural causes wouldn't fix it, because the coming wealth transfer mostly flows from boomers to Gen X, not to Gen Z. So over the next decade, roughly $38 trillion is set to change hands in that direction, leaving Gen Z further marginalized. With that kind of grip on wealth, the boomer dominance in leadership isn't surprising. Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, born in 1956, remains a central figure in modern finance. Larry Summers, the former White House economic advisor, born in 1954, still serves as a key architect of global economic policy. Francis Fukuyama, a political scientist who proposed the idea of end of history, was born in 1952 and still remains a principal mastermind behind the capitalist democracy, despite the flaw of his ideas. And leadership is only one layer of the problem. There is another, less visible one: epistemic hegemony. Look at the 21st century zeitgeist: free markets, lax taxation, the generous pension funding. These ideas function like iron laws inside the public consciousness. They aren't always branded as neoliberal, but the effect is similar. They lock in the generational advantage for the boomers, and the loop just feeds itself. The pro-boomer theories justify the pro-boomer policies. These policies then shape the boomer experiences, and that experiences becomes the justification. Round and round, a closed circuit is formed. And that's why boomer interests are politically untouchable across the West. The life expectancy has increased by more than 10 years since the 1950s. But the retirement ages remain nearly impossible to raise, even as pension funding gaps widen year by year. But the math does not just disappear. The Western governments accumulate astronomical numbers of debt, and the future generations inherit the bill. Gen Z cannot stop this, not because the problem is subtle, but because the voting structure is brutal. They are outvoted. Boomers turn out at higher rates, and they dominate the electoral math. Compulsory voting and the inheritance taxes exist as solutions, And many of these ideas are actually popular in principle, but they still remain at the bottom of the agenda because the boomer generation holds an electoral chokehold. This is also where Manker Orson's warning across the West has come back. After describing the post-war growth, he has predicted that the advanced economies will drift into a situation where the new interest groups will rise inside the post-war order. Over time, they will form these distributive coalitions, which are the groups that organize to seize the disproportionate benefits for their members, even when doing so weakens the society as a whole. His prediction has become the reality. After enjoying the windfall of their era, the boomers had just denied the comparable opportunity to the generations that followed. It's the classic move, pulling the ladder up behind you. For younger generations, the downstream consequences are severe. Across the advanced economies, the Gen Z is far less likely than their parents to believe that their lives will surpass the previous generations. That pessimism has shown up in the delayed marriage and declining fertility. Fertility rates has fallen sharply from roughly 2.5 in the 1960s to around 1.5 today. And the damage extends beyond that. The nuclear family structure has been hollowing out. The marriage rates collapsed. A growing share of children are born without two parents. These arrangements are often isolating, and that isolation makes Gen Z especially vulnerable to the attention economy. Their livelihoods and identities are increasingly captured and manipulated by the social media platforms. The non-human interaction proliferates. Cyberbullying becomes ambient. So seeking for the online validation replaces the real social belonging. The result is just brutal. The people who were born after 1996 become the most emotionally fragile generation on record, with youth mental illness rates reaching unprecedented levels. Now let's turn to education, which in theory should be the counterweight to all these problems. Historically, it was the last vehicle for intergenerational mobility, but it has failed to reverse the trend this time. Roughly 40% of Gen Z is earning a college degree, making them the most educated generation in history. Yet the higher education is now marked by deep institutional dysfunction by design. The expansion of higher education was not driven primarily by labor market demand or a collective commitment to knowledge. It just reflects the restructuring of educational institutions along the neoliberal lines. Since the 1980s, the public funding for universities across the West has been slashed. In the United States, the tax subsidies have fallen from 60% to around 20% today. Universities were pushed to operate by logic of the market, and they just begin behaving like real estate enterprises and private equity funds. They have expanded their admissions to generate the larger cohorts. They raise the tuition, and they recycle these fees into the ever-expanding campuses. To accommodate the swelling enrollments, the university departments have created these new degrees such as gender studies, which often just reflects the faculty's own ideological preferences instead of coherent bodies of knowledge. And the reason is very simple. These programs are inexpensive to teach and easy for students to graduate. Business and finance programs also expanded for the same reasons. There is minimal investment, but low intellectual inputs. Even in STEM fields, the courses increasingly lag behind the tech reality. The postgraduate education has expanded even more dramatically, especially at elite institutions like the Ivy Leagues. Universities has monopolized the prestige through professional schools and certificate programs, including EMBAs. In 1995, Columbia University has established their School of Professional Studies, offering these postgraduate degrees in areas like negotiation tactics or sports management. And these are essentially subjects that should be taught as undergraduate courses or in the vocational trainings. But the profit motive is so transparent that it produces a historical irony. Columbia was once an intellectual center of the FDR's New Deal, and a critique of excessive capitalism. Now it has become one of the most effective practitioners of capitalism. By 2025, Columbia's endowment has reached almost $16 billion and continues to grow. And they have skillfully conducted the tax evasion on behalf of donors in the name of academic freedom. The cumulative effect is the degradation of education itself. The functional role of education, which is the transmission of skills relevant to the labor market, has effectively collapsed under the proliferation of useless degrees. Today, even when degrees match job descriptions, nearly all high-skill jobs require months of additional trainings. Then there's like the interactive role of education. The socialization of students into a shared civic and professional culture has also weakened. The world-renowned professors who should be mentors increasingly function as just institutional brand ambassadors for these schools. So teaching is delegated to the adjuncts and temporary staff who are often unqualified. Universities in practice has become diploma mills. Graduates are certified for enduring years of mundane blindness, not for demonstrating their pursuit for the intellectual capacity. So now a cautious listener might just ask, is this education model even sustainable? The neoliberal economy is supposed to be defined by the cutthroat competitions. If this competition is real, then the firms should demand ever more skilled human labor to survive. But that picture no longer matches how the large corporations operate today. The blunt truth is that a cohort of mediocre, sometimes even totally incompetent graduates is not an accident of the system. It is increasingly what the system wants. Neoliberal theory welcomes the standardized workflows and flattened hierarchies. In practice, that routinizes the division of labor inside the major firms. Many of the roles today can be just performed with minimal understanding of the business itself. The job is to execute the workflow, not to master the model. In that environment, a high school dropout can be trained into an analyst in an investment banking firm after 3 months of vocational coaching. Because a firm does not need fresh insights, it only needs compliance with a procedural justice. The corporate consolidation has also rewritten the story of competition. Throughout industries, the dominant players has faced fewer rivals. The market pressure that is supposed to discipline them fades away. Predictable profit flows take its place. In a cartelized oligopoly, the greatest threat often comes from inside, not from outside. So for the firms, the real danger is the employee who understands the business well enough to leave and to build a competitive company using the insider knowledge. That is why firms invest so heavily to prevent its own workers from fully mastering the business models. That is also why they just resist cultivating employees with the capacity to become future rivals. That logic shows up in the hiring process. In the elite industries like banking and consulting, the hiring begins to resemble the reverse selection. They don't select for the independent thinkers who might just destabilize the organization. Instead, they just select the candidates who will fit the machine well as a cog. Employees are chosen on arbitrary and political criteria in order to satisfy the superficial ESG goals or DEI requirements. The purpose is never about empowerment, but the corporate optics. The companies then just tighten the trap through compensation. Instead of paying wages that make employees financially mobile, companies just compensate them with assets, stock options, and deferred equity, things that only materialize after years. And these are the golden handcuffs, because if you leave early, you will lose income embedded in the future stock value. And even when the options does materialize, the short exercise windows creates another barrier. So employees must pay strike prices and taxes to extract value. Without the sudden liquidity, that cost can be huge, so they choose to stay. And the longer they stay, the harder to exit. The result is a bifurcated labor market. At the top, those who secure the elite positions enjoy two things at once: high incomes and substantial assets, which is a combination that even Marx himself did not anticipate. Yet, they are compelled to work extreme hours, not because they are desperate, but because they are defending their spot against replacement. Much of the labor today becomes performative: meetings, compliance rituals, organizational charm. It just validates their existence inside a firm without producing value in any serious sense. And for the companies, these inefficiencies are useful because they exhaust your creativity and they block your innovation. They keep employees too tired and too entangled to become truly independent thinkers and economic actors. So dependency on the firms becomes the new religion. At the other end sits an overproduced cohort of graduates facing the chronic underemployment or unemployment. Under these new corporate dynamics, even degrees from the elite institutions no longer guarantees the stable careers. The credential costs more, but it buys less. And the technology adds another layer of pressure. Artificial intelligence, the AI, is the logical product of an economy that treats labor saving and cost cutting as principal objectives. As the AI advances, it also threatens to render the STEM degrees obsolete. This is where the political danger concentrates. As underemployment becomes permanent for a growing number of the brightest Gen Zs, disappointment turns into resentments. Frustration hardens. The denial of elite inclusion becomes politically explosive. Eventually, a counter-elite forms, excluded, angry, and unwilling to play by the rules. Once that counter-elite reaches the scale, it will begin to destabilize the system itself. This is not a distant apocalypse. The modern history is full of similar episodes. In Europe, the upheavals of the 1970s and 1980s were driven by the young and excluded elites pushing against the ossified establishments. Take examples like the right-wing military dictatorships in Portugal and Greece, or against the communist regimes in the Eastern Europe. The Arab Spring in the 2010s also followed a comparable logic. The aging leadership confronted a younger generation that had higher education, higher expectations, but had nowhere to place them. The West is not immune to the same forces. As the universities remain addicted to profits, and technology continues to displace labor, the overproduction of Gen Z counter-elites will accelerate. A critical mass will be reached unless concessions are made. That also explains why Donald Trump has assembled the youngest cabinet in the US history and elevated the J.D. Vance, which is a Gen X figure born in the 1980s, to the vice presidency. Whether this is merely a tactical blip or the start of a real shift in the fortunes of the young is still too early to tell. Across the world, generational succession planning remains elusive. As aging populations entrench the power, the incentive for the frustrated Gen Z to attempt a final all or nothing gamble grows stronger. And if domestic structures remain too rigid to observe such pressure, the external conflicts can start to look like the last available release valve. There's a sobering historical marker here. During the Kosovo War in 1999, there was a British general named Michael Jackson who reportedly refused an American order to attack the Russian troops in Kosovo. So he said this: "I'm not going to start the World War III for you." That kind of restraint may be harder to sustain today. So the question is, can the world step back from the brink or slipping again into the dark abyss of history? And that is what we will take up in the next episode. Thanks for watching. This is Curtis at Sinopolitik. Stay tuned.
And that brings us to the end of this week's edition of China Now. We have explored the latest headlines in China currents. We've gained expert insights in the Thinkers Forum with Shaun Rein. And we've had very sharp analysis in the topics from Peter Yang. Thank you so much for joining us. And please remember to send in your comments, send in your thoughts, share with us your feedback and suggestions for the coming episodes of the show through the email provided below. My name is Makiza Latifa. Until next time, goodbye, and let China not be far away from you anymore.